Okay, so let's look at this table of the quadrilateral properties. We have some properties in the left column, and then we've got the 4 special quadrilaterals we've been talking about along the top row. We're going to check off which properties each of these quadrilaterals have. So let's start with the parallelogram. Does a parallelogram have 2 pair of opposite parallel sides? It sure does. That's the definition of a parallelogram. 2 pair of opposite parallel sides. Now, does a parallelogram have opposite sides that are congruent? Again, it sure does. That is another property for parallelograms. Now, in order to be a parallelogram, do you have to have all 4 sides congruent? You do not. In a parallelogram, only opposite sides have to be congruent. How about the next one? Opposite angles are congruent. That is true again for a parallelogram. All right, the next one, consecutive angles are supplementary. That is correct. A parallelogram has opposite angles that are supplementary. Oh, consecutive angles, I'm sorry. Now, what does consecutive mean? Do you remember? Consecutive means that they are next to each other. If you were to go around the parallelogram, the angles that are right next to each other should be supplementary. So they sum to 180. The diagonals bisect each other. Is this true of the parallelogram? It sure is. All right, are the diagonals congruent in a parallelogram? No, they do not need to be. Are they perpendicular? Nope. Do they bisect the opposite angles? That is not a property of a parallelogram either. So this is what we've got for parallelograms. We have 5 properties. The next one we're going to look at is the rectangle. Now we know that a rectangle is a specific type of parallelogram. So because it is a parallelogram, it automatically will have all of the same properties that the parallelogram does. So I can check those off right away. Now let's look at the extra properties that we get when we have a rectangle. Does a rectangle have all 4 sides congruent? It does not. In a rectangle, are the diagonals congruent? They are, so we can check that one. In a rectangle, are the diagonals perpendicular? They are not. Do the diagonals bisect the pairs of opposite angles? They do not. So that's the only additional property we get with the rectangle. Now let's look at the rhombus. We know that a rhombus is a parallelogram. So again, it should get those same 5 properties that we know all parallelograms have. Is a rhombus a rectangle? It is not. So it does not get that one pink property. Let's look at the other properties and see if a rhombus has some of those. In a rhombus, are all 4 sides congruent? They are. Let's put a nice check there. Ooh, let's use a color that's a little bit more different. Purple. All right, so we just said the diagonals are not congruent. Are the diagonals perpendicular though? They are for a rhombus. And do the diagonals bisect both pair of opposite angles? That is another property that we learned about the rhombus. Now let's look at the last one, the square. We know that a square is a parallelogram, so it is going to have all those same blue parallelogram properties. We also know that a square is a rectangle. So it's going to have that same pink property as the rectangle. Well, as I had mistakenly said before, but is true, a square is also a rhombus. So it has the same purple properties that the rhombus has. And look at that. The square has all of the properties. So there is the properties table for these 4 special quadrilaterals.